Hello, Econ 202. I just finished grading the discussion forums for Chapter 9, and there was a sort of consistent error in there that was bugging me, and I think is really important for us to talk about. A number of you kept saying things like something like more borrowing pushes interest rates down. That one of the reasons borrowing is good, going to debt is good, right, is that it pushes interest rates down. And I'm thinking to myself, where are you getting that from? That's backwards, right? As the demand for borrowing goes up, as people want to borrow more, it pushes interest rates up, right? That's the when people want to borrow, the demand to borrow money is a demand curve like any other curve, and the interest rate is the price of borrowing. And this was puzzling me, and I couldn't figure out where it was coming from in the chapter. And finally, one of you pointed to figure 9.5 to sort of show to be the place right where you were getting it from. And just in case you don't remember, I have my trusty little board with me today. And that's basically 9.5, right? It's the demand to borrow, it's interest rates up the vertical axis and dollar amount across the horizontal axis. And as I just said, the interest rate, right, is a price, and the dollars you're borrowing is a quantity. This is a demand curve like every other demand curve that we've ever looked at. What is it telling us? What you guys are saying this is saying is that, I'm going to put it down for a bit. What you're saying that's saying is, as people want to borrow more, interest rates get lower, right? And you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, sure, right? As people want to borrow more, interest looks like interest rates get lower. But the problem here is you're confusing demand and quantity demanded. What a demand curve shows is how much people want to buy, in this case borrow, at various prices, in this case interest rates. It's not what's not being shown here is the quantity people want to borrow to drives the interest rate. Just the opposite. A demand curve says holding everything constant. Remember, putting everything away in the box. If we vary the interest rate, how much do people want to borrow? And not surprisingly, as the book makes very clear, at high interest rates, people want to borrow less. As the interest rate falls, people want to borrow more. Again, everything else held equal. Okay? It's not that people's demand to borrow quote causes the interest rate to be what it is. Rather, it's whatever the interest rate is that helps determine people's demand to borrow. This is a confusion again of demand and quantity demanded. This is a demand curve. It's simply showing how much people want to borrow at various interest rates. And if you think about it for a minute, does it even make sense to sort of say rising demand for something pushing prices down? Right? If people want to borrow more, right, they're going to banks, they're saying we want more, we want more, we want more. Wouldn't that push prices up as people are as borrowers are competing with other borrowers? Think back to the things we talked about in earlier chapters. This is a perfect application of all the supply and demand stuff we did earlier. If you don't believe me, consider the following. Okay? It's the demand for apples, right? There's the price, there's the quantity. Would you look at this and say, as people want more apples, the price of apples goes up? No, we know what this means. What this means is, as the price of apples vary, people's quantity demanded for those apples will vary. At a higher price, people will buy fewer apples, all things equal. At a lower price, they'll buy more. These two graphs are identical. There's no conceptual difference between these two graphs. And so when you look at that 9.5, right, it's really important to understand that that's just a demand curve, like every other demand curve that we've looked at. And I guess my sort of big picture point here is if you are having trouble understanding this point, right, that's important because this is one of the key ideas that we've talked about. We talked about early on, and a number of you, of course, have taken 201, right? So this is an absolutely basic point in economics, this difference between demand and quantity demanded, and understanding what the demand curve is showing, right? Which is how will people react, what will people want to buy or borrow at various prices or interest rates, right? All else held equal, right? Everything else in the box. So if you're struggling with this, or if you looked at that graph figure 9.5 and thought it was saying that the more people borrow, the lower interest rates are, more people want to borrow, the lower interest rates are, you need to double check that, and you need to sort of go back and look at some of the stuff we did in chapters 4 and 5 and 6 that sort of talked about the microeconomics here, and make sure you understand that. I think it's really important to not, let's put it this way, when you leave any kind of introductory economics class, whether it's micro or macro, this is a mistake that you shouldn't make. And so it's really important to me as a teacher that you guys understand this difference and understand why 9.5 is a demand curve, just like that demand curve for apples or anything else. If you want to think about it in the current context, right? The fact that people want more toilet paper is certainly not driving the price of toilet paper down, right? If anything, it's driving it way up. So again, let your intuition work here, right? It doesn't make sense when you think about it with other goods and services, and it's no different with people's desire to borrow. So I hope that's helpful. It's a mistake I wanted to make sure was corrected, both to understand the borrowing point and the discussion forum question, but also to make sure you understand the underlying microeconomic point, which to me is really the key here. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope you're all staying well.